The crystal champagne flute shattered against the wall inches from my head, sending shards glittering like diamonds across the polished hardwood floor. I stood frozen, watching my husband's face transform from practiced charm to unrecognizable, rage in an instant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "I want a divorce," Daniel hissed, his voice dropping to that hollow tone I'd documented dozens of times in my private notes. "You've been lying to us all." Around us, Seattle's elite watched in stunned silence, smartphones still raised from capturing what was supposed to be a toast to our 5th anniversary. But rather than flinch or cry, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I smiled. "Perfect timing, Daniel," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "You couldn't have chosen a better moment if you tried." Confusion clouded his handsome features as I reached for my purse, retrieving my phone. With the press of a button, I activated the program I'd prepared months ago. "You should all check your phones," I told the gathered crowd of witnesses. "You've just received some interesting information about the Cooper family business practices." Daniel's cousin Ryan lunged for my phone but froze as notifications began chiming throughout the room. I locked eyes with Harriet Cooper, my mother-in-law, whose perfectly composed face had gone ashen. 5 years, I said softly. That was the requirement for Daniel to access his grandfather's trust. A stable marriage for 5 years. I touched my cheek where a champagne droplet had splashed. "But attempted assault in front of witnesses tends to complicate divorce proceedings, doesn't it?" 12 hours earlier, I stood at the window of our Lake Washington mansion, watching dawn break over the water. The Seattle skyline glittered in the distance, city lights still visible against the pale morning sky. Behind me, Daniel slept soundly, unaware that today would change everything. I'd chosen my outfit the night before, a steel gray Armani suit that had cost more than my first car. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd be wearing battle armor to my own anniversary celebration. I moved silently to the walk-in closet, the one place in our sprawling home without surveillance. Harriet had insisted on installing security measures during last year's renovation, a thoughtful gift for her beloved son and daughter-in-law. Only I knew about the tiny devices I'd discovered during a methodical sweep 3 months ago. Only I knew that I'd left them functional, but had rigged them to show loop footage whenever I needed privacy. Inside the closet, I pressed my finger against a hidden panel in the wall. It slid back silently, revealing a waterproof case containing encrypted hard drives, a backup laptop, and 2 burner phones, my insurance policy, my ammunition. For 4 years, I'd been the picture-perfect addition to the Cooper dynasty, Stanford Business School graduate, supportive wife, Charity Foundation board member. Seattle's society pages loved us. Harriet paraded me at every function like a prize thoroughbred. No one suspected that behind my carefully applied makeup and designer clothes, I was building a company that would eventually expose the Cooper empire for what it really was. A sophisticated criminal enterprise built on fraud, market manipulation, and psychological control. It started with inconsistencies I noticed in the family business documents, numbers that didn't add up, subsidiaries in countries with lax banking regulations. Then came Daniel's strange behavior after family meetings, more withdrawn, less decisive. The way Harriet would whisper things to him that would instantly alter his demeanor. I'd spent my early career in financial compliance before meeting Daniel. I knew what fraud looked like. I knew what psychological control looked like, too. The day I found Daniel staring catatonically at his computer after a private meeting with Ryan was the day I began my investigation in earnest. That night, I purchased my first burner phone and began documenting everything. I checked my watch, 6:30 a.m., nearly time to become Morgan Cooper again. I replaced everything, sealed the compartment, and selected a conservative outfit for the morning. I had a board meeting for Horizon Innovations, though the Cooper family had no idea I was the majority shareholder and CEO. As far as they knew, I volunteered at a tech incubator twice a week, a suitable hobby for a Cooper wife with too much time on her hands. In reality, I had built a legitimate tech company valued at $340 million, using seed money from my pre-marriage savings and a brilliant idea for supply chain optimization software that major retailers couldn't resist. Every decision, every contract, every hire had been made under my maiden name through a complex web of legal entities. Not even my employees knew who truly owned the company. They reported to a management team who believed they worked for a private equity group. As I applied my makeup, my phone buzzed with a text from Harriet. "Wear the blue Dior tonight. Daniel loves that color on you." Another command disguised as motherly advice. I texted back a grateful response, then made a mental note to wear the burgundy Valentino I'd been saving for a special occasion. Small rebellions kept me sane. I heard Daniel stirring in the bedroom. I checked my secure messaging app quickly. My contact at the SEC had confirmed receipt of the final piece of evidence I'd sent yesterday. "Moving on this next week," they'd written. "Anything else you need us to know before we proceed?" I smiled as I typed back, "One final piece coming tonight." Little did Harriet know that her elaborate anniversary party would become the Cooper family's undoing. I closed the app, erased my browsing history, and stepped out of the bathroom with a practiced smile. "Morning," Daniel said mechanically, his voice flat. He was already checking his phone, no doubt responding to messages from his mother or Ryan. Once he would have pulled me back to bed, laughing and teasing me about waking up too early. That Daniel had disappeared gradually over our 5-year marriage, replaced by this polished shell who responded to his family's signals like a trained animal. "Big day," I said lightly, straightening his tie as he dressed. "I can't believe it's been 5 years already." He nodded, not really listening. "Mother's excited about tonight. Everyone important will be there." "I'm sure they will," I replied, thinking of the guest list I'd seen on Harriet's desk, carefully curated to include only Cooper allies and business associates. Not one of my real friends had been invited. Not my mentor from Stanford, not my former colleagues. The party had been sanitized of anyone with genuine connection to me, anyone who might notice if something were to happen to the real Morgan beneath the Cooper veneer. "What are your plans today?" Daniel asked, the question automatic rather than interested. "Board meeting at the incubator, then lunch with Sophia," I said. Both true, in their way. The board meeting was for my own company, and Sophia was the only person who knew parts of my real plan, my attorney who had helped structure Horizon Innovations to be completely separate from any Cooper connections. "Don't be late getting back," he said. "Mother scheduled the hairstylist for 3. I nodded obediently, playing my role to perfection. As I gathered my things, I caught Daniel watching me with a strange expression. Not quite suspicion, not quite concern. Something else. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd fallen in love with before the Cooper conditioning had fully taken hold. Then it was gone, replaced by the vacant look I'd documented for months in my private files. "See you tonight," I said, kissing his cheek lightly. As I drove my Audi toward downtown Seattle, I felt the weight of the coming evening pressing on me. Tonight would change everything. For the Coopers, for Daniel, for me. The family's criminal enterprise would be exposed, their control over Daniel broken. Justice would finally be served. But as rain began to fall across the windshield, I wondered, when the dust settled, would there be anything left of the man I'd once loved? Or had Harriet's psychological manipulation destroyed him completely? At the Evergreen Tower, I parked, in my reserved spot, labeled M. Taylor, my maiden name, and took the executive elevator to the top floor. My assistant, Jenna, met me with coffee and the morning briefing. "The Walmart integration is ahead of schedule," she reported as we walked toward the boardroom, "and the new healthcare module passed all security tests." I nodded, shifting mentally from Morgan Cooper, trophy wife, to Morgan Taylor, tech CEO. Here, I was respected for my mind, not my ability to host dinner parties or wear the right designer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Here, I had built something genuine, something that actually helped businesses operate more efficiently and ethically. The irony wasn't lost on me that while the Cooper empire manipulated markets and bribed officials, I had built a legitimate business that was now worth more than Daniel's trust fund, a business that would continue long after the Cooper name was disgraced. The board meeting proceeded smoothly. Quarterly projections exceeded expectations. Our new product launch was on schedule, and the company's valuation had increased another 12% since our last assessment. As the board members filed out, congratulating me on another successful quarter, I allowed myself a moment of pride. Morgan, called Sophia, staying behind as the others left. As both my personal attorney and Horizon's legal counsel, she straddled my two worlds and was the only person who knew the full extent of my plan. When the room was empty, she closed the door and lowered her voice. Everything's in place for tonight. The SEC has the complete file, and Agent Diaz confirmed the FBI will move once they receive your signal. I nodded, tension coiling in my stomach despite my outward calm. And the trust documents? Verified by 3 separate experts, Sophia confirmed. The grandfather's original intent is clear. The Cooper fortune reverts to charitable purposes if the trustees engage in criminal activity. Your evidence of Harriet's manipulation and fraud triggers that clause. The irony was perfect. Old man Cooper, despite his ruthless business tactics, had maintained certain ethical boundaries. His daughter-in-law Harriet had no such constraints. After his son, Daniel's father, died unexpectedly, she had systematically taken control of everything, including reshaping Daniel into her perfect corporate puppet. What about after? I asked, voicing the question that had kept me awake for months. Daniel's psychological state. Sophia's expression softened. The experts confirm that with proper treatment, victims of this kind of psychological manipulation can recover. But it takes time. She hesitated. Are you sure you want to go through with this? We could just submit the evidence anonymously, keep you out of it entirely. I shook my head. They need to be held publicly accountable. Too many people have been hurt. I didn't say the other part, that I needed Daniel to see me as I truly was, not as the compliant wife they had expected me to be. Whether our relationship survived or not, I needed that moment of truth between us. After lunch with Sophia, reviewing final details, I drove back to the mansion to prepare for the evening. The hairstylist Harriet had scheduled was waiting, along with a makeup artist. I submitted to their ministrations, playing the role of excited anniversary celebrant while my mind rehearsed the evening ahead. As they worked, I received a text from my SEC contact. All systems go, signal when ready. I deleted it immediately, then opened my regular messages where Harriet had sent detailed instructions for the evening. I scrolled through them dutifully, noting the timeline she'd established with military precision. 7 p.m., arrive at the waterfront grill. 7:15 p.m., preliminary champagne toast. 7:30 p.m., seated for dinner. 8:45 p.m., anniversary presentation. 1 p.m., Daniel's announcement. I frowned at the last item. Daniel's announcement? This wasn't in the plans I'd been told about. I texted Harriet casually. Getting excited for tonight? Just reviewing the timeline? What's Daniel announcing at 9? Her response came quickly. Just a little surprise. Nothing for you to worry about, dear. The knot in my stomach tightened. The Coopers never did anything without calculation. Whatever this announcement was, it had been planned carefully and kept from me intentionally. All the more reason to be prepared for anything. When the beauty team finally left, I stood before the mirror examining their work. My dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, my makeup flawless. I looked exactly as Harriet Cooper wanted her daughter-in-law to appear. Polished, controlled, perfect. I waited until I heard Daniel showering in the master bathroom before retrieving the burgundy Valentino from its hiding place. The deep, red fabric caught the light as I slipped it on, its color reminiscent of wine or blood. Not the demure blue Harriet had commanded. A final act of defiance. When Daniel emerged from the bathroom, his eyes registered momentary surprise at my dress choice, but he said nothing. The conditioning to defer to his mother on all things had become so ingrained that he likely wasn't even aware of the discord. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, he said, adjusting his cufflinks, platinum pieces with the Cooper family crest that had belonged to his grandfather. I nodded, adding a simple diamond necklace, one I had purchased myself with early. Profits from Horizon, not a Cooper family gift. Every detail tonight would matter. Every choice would tell part of the story. As we rode to the waterfront grill in silence, I studied Daniel's profile in the fading daylight. His jawline still made my heart skip. The physical attraction had never faded. But the vital spark that had drawn me to him, his quick laugh and curious mind, had been systematically suppressed by years of his mother's manipulation. I had discovered Dr. Lawrence Finch's name in the Cooper private accounts 6 months ago, $25,000 monthly payments for executive consulting. A deeper dig revealed he specialized in a controversial form of behavioral modification and had been working with Daniel since his father's death when Daniel was just 23. The car pulled up to the restaurant where paparazzi waited, no doubt alerted by Harriet's publicist. Daniel helped me out, his hand at the small of my back as we posed for photos. A perfect couple celebrating a perfect anniversary. The flashbulbs caught the burgundy of my dress, making it flame against the evening sky. "Mrs. Cooper has been waiting for you," the maitre d' murmured, leading us toward the private elevator to the rooftop terrace. As we ascended, I reached into my clutch, confirming my phone was set to record. One press of a button would activate the program that would send my evidence package to the authorities and selected journalists. Another would start recording everything that happened on the terrace. Daniel glanced at me, something like concern flickering in his eyes. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, the words mechanical. "Thank you," I replied, searching his face for any hint of the man I married. Nothing. The elevator doors opened to reveal a breathtaking scene. The Seattle skyline provided a glittering backdrop to the glass-enclosed rooftop terrace. White orchids, Harriet's signature, adorned every surface. Crystal chandeliers had been hung to create the illusion of stars floating above the gathering. And there, arranged in a perfect semicircle, stood approximately 50 guests, all smiling with practiced warmth as we stepped onto the terrace. "Happy anniversary!" The collective greeting washed over us, as artificial as the floral arrangements. Harriet glided forward, resplendent in midnight blue Chanel, her silver hair styled impeccably. At 60, she remained striking. A woman, whose ruthlessness was matched only by her skill at concealing it. "Darling Morgan," she embraced me, her Hermes perfume enveloping me. Her lips brushed my cheek as she whispered, "Blue would have photographed better with Daniel." "I wanted to surprise everyone," I replied, matching her steel with silk. Her eyes narrowed fractionally before her social mask slipped back into place. She linked her arm through mine, leading me into the crowd. "Everyone important is here," she announced, parading me past Seattle's elite, the mayor, tech executives, bank presidents, socialites. I noted each face, mentally checking them against my files of Cooper connections. Not one of my genuine friends was present. The guest list had been sanitized of anyone with real attachment to me. "Champagne for the anniversary couple," called Ryan, appearing with 2 flutes of bubbling liquid. I accepted without drinking, noting how Ryan's eyes darted to the entrance where I spotted a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit being escorted in. Dr. Lawrence Finch. The behavioral modification specialist whose monthly invoices I had documented in my evidence file. "Excuse me," Ryan murmured, moving to intercept the doctor. A server offering canapés provided perfect cover for me to drift closer to their conversation. "Timeline has accelerated," Ryan was saying, his back to the party. "The transition needs to happen tonight." "The conditioning may not hold under stress," Finch replied, his clinical tone unmistakable even in hushed conversation. "We don't have that luxury anymore. The trust disbursement happens next week." They noticed my proximity and shifted smoothly to greetings. Finch's handshake was brief, his eyes assessing me with clinical detachment. "Mrs. Cooper, congratulations on your anniversary," he said. "You look radiant this evening." "Thank you, Dr. Finch," I replied. "I'm surprised to see you here. Professional colleagues don't usually attend anniversary parties." A flash of something, concern, suspicion, crossed his face before he smiled thinly. "The Coopers are more like family than clients." "How fortunate for everyone," I replied, noting how his gaze shifted to Daniel, who stood across the room talking with the mayor. Throughout the next hour, I circulated carefully, playing my role while observing the room's dynamics. Harriet remained, at the epicenter, her laughter theatrical, her eyes constantly tracking Daniel and me. Something was definitely planned for tonight, something beyond the standard anniversary celebration. "Wonderful turnout," remarked the bank president, one of the Coopers' longest allies. "Harriet certainly knows how to celebrate family." "Indeed," I agreed, though I'm surprised so few of my colleagues could make it. "Exclusive guest list," he chuckled. Harriet was quite specific about keeping this intimate. By intimate, he meant controlled. The vulnerability I'd felt earlier prickled stronger. Now, this celebration was hermetically sealed. Anyone here would side with the Coopers if something happened to me. As the party shifted to dinner, Harriet orchestrated the seating with tactical precision. Daniel to my right, her at the head of the table, Dr. Finch positioned directly across from me, his gaze clinically assessing every interaction. Harriet tapped her crystal glass, silencing conversation. "Before we dine, a toast to my beloved daughter-in-law." She stood, commanding the room with practiced authority. 5 years ago, Daniel brought home this brilliant, beautiful woman, and I knew immediately she was special. Her eyes met mine, warm on the surface, glacial beneath. Morgan has become everything the Cooper family values: loyal, discreet, and committed to our legacy. The gathering murmured approval. I maintained my grateful smile while translating her actual message. "We own you." "To Morgan," Harriet raised her glass. "May this 35th year be transformative." The word hung in the air like a promise, or a threat. As servers presented the first course, Harriet glided behind my chair, resting manicured hands on my shoulders. To onlookers, a maternal gesture. I felt the predatory pressure of her grip. "Such a perfect evening," she murmured, her voice carrying just to my ears. And after dinner, Daniel's special announcement about the family's future. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on my shoulder before she moved away, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the distinct impression of a trap about to spring. I glanced at Daniel, finding his eyes fixed on his water glass, his fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern I had documented in my notes, a behavior that always followed Harriet's private conversations with him. Whatever they had planned for tonight was accelerating. By the time dessert was cleared, tension hummed beneath the surface of the perfect celebration. Harriet nodded to the staff, who began arranging a small podium near the terrace railing, with the Seattle skyline glittering behind it. "Before coffee, we have a special presentation," Harriet announced, gesturing for Daniel to join her. As he rose mechanically, I noticed Dr. Finch shift forward slightly in his chair, watching with clinical interest. Ryan moved closer to the terrace entrance, effectively blocking it. Whatever was coming, they were positioning themselves strategically. I touched my phone in my clutch, confirming it was ready to record. The federal agents I'd been working with were on standby, waiting for my signal. Daniel took his position. At the podium, his face oddly blank. Harriet stood just behind his left shoulder, her hand resting proprietarily on his back. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our anniversary," Daniel began, his voice flat, despite the formal words. "The past 5 years with Morgan have been—" He paused, and I saw Harriet's fingers press into his shoulder blade. A physical cue. "A necessary chapter in the Cooper legacy," he continued, the strange phrasing causing a ripple of confused murmurs. Around the terrace, phones were raised, recording the moment. Perfect. "As we move forward, changes are required," Daniel continued, his voice increasingly mechanical. "Morgan has served her purpose in the family, but her usefulness has ended." Gasps rippled through the gathering. This was not the expected anniversary speech. I remained seated, watching the scene unfold with clinical detachment, much as I imagined Dr. Finch was doing from across the table. "Investigation has revealed her disloyalty," Daniel continued, each word clearly programmed, not his own. "The Cooper family requires absolute fidelity." Harriet's smile had grown predatory as she watched me for signs of distress or shock. I gave her neither, simply taking a sip of water as Daniel continued the character assassination she had scripted. For him. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am filing for divorce on grounds of breach of trust." The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to me, waiting for tears, protests, collapse. Instead, I slowly stood, smoothing the burgundy fabric of my dress. "That's quite an anniversary present, Daniel," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "Perhaps you'd care to elaborate on this alleged disloyalty?" Harriet stepped forward. "We know about your secret meetings, Morgan. Your communications with outsiders. The documents you've accessed." I raised an eyebrow. "How thorough of you." "Daniel!" Harriet snapped, her command voice emerging. She leaned close to his ear, whispering something I couldn't hear from my position. What happened next unfolded in terrible slow motion. Daniel's eyes went completely vacant, his posture rigid. He reached for his champagne glass, and with a sudden violent motion, hurled it toward my head. The crystal shattered against the wall inches from me, champagne splashing across my face and dress. "I want a divorce," he hissed, the words hollow and programmed. "You've betrayed us all." In the frozen moment that followed, I felt an almost supernatural calm settle over me. This was exactly what I had needed. Irrefutable proof of the psychological manipulation captured on dozens of phones. I smiled, reaching for my clutch. "Perfect timing, Daniel," I said clearly. "You couldn't have chosen a better moment if you tried." Confusion clouded his features as I retrieved my phone. With one press of a button, I activated the program I'd prepared months ago. My evidence package was now transmitting to the FBI, the SEC, and selected journalists. "You should all check your phones," I told the gathering. "You've just received some interesting information about the Cooper family business practices." Ryan lunged for my phone but froze as notifications began chiming throughout the room. The guests, Seattle's elite who had been recording what they thought would be my humiliation, were now receiving documented evidence of the Cooper family's crimes. I locked eyes with Harriet, whose perfectly composed face had gone ashen. 5 years, I said softly. That was the requirement for Daniel to access his grandfather's trust. A stable marriage for 5 years. I touched my cheek where champagne dripped down. But attempted assault in front of witnesses tends to complicate divorce proceedings, doesn't it? The first federal agents appeared at the terrace entrance, badges displayed. Agent Teresa Diaz, my primary contact, gave me a nearly imperceptible nod as she approached Harriet. "Harriet Cooper, we have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and documents in your possession," she stated, her tone professionally neutral as she presented the paperwork. Around us, the elegant anniversary celebration had transformed into a scene of barely contained chaos. The mayor was already backing toward the exit. The bank president was frantically texting someone. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the shattered glass as if it belonged to someone else. Horror was dawning in his eyes as the programming fractured under the stress of the moment. "Morgan," he whispered, genuine emotion breaking through for the first time in months. "What's happening? What did I just do?" I approached him cautiously. "You've been under your mother's control, Daniel. The behavioral modification program she's had you in since your father died, Dr. Finch's specialty." Across the terrace, Finch was already in conversation with a federal agent, his clinical detachment crumbling as he calculated his legal position. "I would never throw something at you," Daniel said, his voice breaking as he looked at the shattered glass and the champagne staining my dress. "I don't understand." "I know you wouldn't," I said softly. "That's why I've spent 3 years building this case instead of simply leaving. You weren't the only victim, Daniel." Harriet, seeing her control slipping away completely, made a final, desperate attempt. "This is absurd. Daniel, tell them this woman is delusional." But Daniel was staring at Dr. Finch across the room, terrible recognition dawning. "The sessions," he murmured. "The executive coaching that always left me with headaches. The triggers you installed." His voice trailed off as memories began breaking through the conditioning. Agent Diaz approached us. "Mrs. Cooper, we'll need your statement, and Mr. Cooper will need to come with us as well, though primarily as a victim in this case." I nodded, watching as Harriet was read her rights, her empire crumbling around her. The evidence I'd gathered was no longer just files on secured servers. It was unfolding in human drama across the rooftop terrace, as years of manipulation, fraud, and control began to unravel. And as I stood there, champagne soaking my burgundy dress, I knew there was no going back. Whatever the future held for Daniel and me, the truth had finally shattered the perfect facade of the Cooper dynasty. 3 years earlier, I stood in the gleaming lobby of Evergreen Tower, clutching my business plan like a shield. The receptionist eyed me suspiciously as I approached, my department store suit a stark contrast to her designer outfit. "I have an appointment with Westlake Ventures," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Morgan Taylor." She checked her computer, her expression shifting from dismissive to marginally more respectful. 42nd floor. They're expecting you." As the elevator ascended, I studied my reflection in its mirrored walls, mentally rehearsing my pitch. 6 months into my marriage to Daniel Cooper, I had discovered something unexpected: emptiness. Behind the glamorous facade of charity galas and society luncheons stretched endless days of meaningless activity. Harriet had made it clear that my role was to be decorative, not productive. "A Cooper wife doesn't need a career," she had told me over tea in her Medina estate, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "Your job is supporting Daniel and representing the family appropriately." The elevator doors opened onto the offices of Westlake Ventures, one of Seattle's premier venture capital firms. I had secured this meeting through a former Stanford classmate, carefully ensuring no connections to the Cooper family. "Morgan Taylor?" a young associate approached. "They're ready for you in the conference room." I had registered my business under my maiden name, using my pre-marriage address and contact information. As far as anyone in the Cooper orbit knew, I was meeting with the Seattle Children's Hospital fundraising committee that morning. The conference room held 4 people, 2 partners and their associates. I set up my presentation, took a deep breath, and began outlining my vision for revolutionary supply chain management software. "The core algorithm I've developed reduces waste by 42% in early testing," I explained, clicking through my carefully prepared slides. "For major retailers, this translates to millions in savings annually, while significantly reducing environmental impact." The senior partner, Claudia Werner, leaned forward. And you've coded this algorithm yourself? Yes, I confirmed. I majored in computer science at Stanford before doing my MBA. This project combines both skill sets. What I didn't mention was that I'd been developing the algorithm during lonely nights at the Cooper mansion, while Daniel attended executive strategy sessions with his mother and cousin. I didn't mention that I'd built the prototype using a laptop purchased with cash and kept hidden in my personal gym locker downtown. After 40 minutes of questions, Claudia dismissed her associates and leaned back in her chair. Your proposal is compelling, Ms. Taylor, but I'm curious. Aren't you married to Daniel Cooper? Why not seek funding through Cooper Ventures? My heart stuttered. This was the moment I'd prepared for. I prefer to succeed or fail on my own merits, I replied smoothly. Family connections create complicated expectations. She studied me for a long moment. Fair enough. But I should disclose that Westlake occasionally partners with Cooper Holdings on larger investments. I understand, I said carefully. However, I'd request confidentiality regarding my involvement. I'd prefer my name not appear in any public documents. If that's a problem, I'll seek funding elsewhere. Claudia's eyes narrowed with interest rather than suspicion. It's unusual, but not unprecedented. We can structure the investment through a management company with you as the anonymous principal. She paused. Though I have to ask, does your husband know about this venture? My husband respects my independence, I lied smoothly. But his family is more traditional. They wouldn't understand a Cooper wife having business interests. I smiled apologetically. Family dynamics can be complicated. Understanding flickered in Claudia's eyes, the universal recognition of powerful family politics. I'm familiar with complicated family dynamics, Ms. Taylor. We can accommodate your privacy requirements. 2 weeks later, I received the call. Westlake was offering $2 million in seed funding. The journey of Horizon Innovations had begun. Walking into our Beacon Hill home that evening, I maintained the same carefully composed expression I'd perfected over months of marriage. Daniel greeted me with a distracted kiss, already dressed for another dinner with Seattle's elite. How was your day? He asked, the question automatic rather than interested. Productive, I replied truthfully. The hospital committee has some interesting fundraising ideas. He nodded absently, checking his watch. Mother's expecting us at 7. The Richardsons will be there. Their foundation might be a good partnership opportunity for your committee. I smiled and headed upstairs to change, the secret knowledge of my funding round humming through me like electricity. This was just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, I built my company with methodical precision. I rented a small office in Pioneer Square under the management company's name and hired a skeleton staff, developers and product managers vetted through non-Cooper connections. I scheduled charity meetings during business hours and worked late into the night from my hidden laptop. The prototype exceeded even my ambitious expectations. Early beta tests with a mid-sized grocery chain showed dramatic improvements in inventory management and waste reduction. By our 6-month development milestone, 3 major retailers had signed letters of intent. That same week, I discovered the first discrepancy in the Cooper family finances. It was an innocent enough beginning. Daniel had asked me to retrieve some documents from his home office for a board meeting. As I searched through his files, I noticed a folder labeled Osaka Project, Confidential. Curious, I opened it to find financial statements for a subsidiary I'd never heard mentioned at family dinners. The numbers immediately caught my attention. The profit margins were impossibly high for the stated business: electronic component, manufacturing. I'd studied enough business cases to recognize when figures didn't align with industry standards. I took photos of the documents with my personal phone before replacing everything exactly as I'd found it. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, I analyzed the numbers in the bathroom with the shower running to mask any sounds. The Osaka subsidiary appeared to be moving approximately $30 million annually, through a series of transactions that made little business sense. Money flowed in from legitimate Cooper enterprises and out to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. This wasn't just aggressive tax planning. This had all the hallmarks of money laundering. I sat on the bathroom floor, my mind racing. Was this an isolated issue, a rogue executive, or something more systematic? The Cooper empire spanned dozens of businesses across multiple industries. If this pattern existed elsewhere. The next morning, I called Sophia Wright, my attorney from pre-Cooper days, and the only person I still trusted implicitly. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from Cooper haunts. "I need completely confidential legal advice," I said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Hypothetically speaking, if someone discovered financial irregularities in a family business, what would their legal obligations be? Sophia's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. Hypothetically, it would depend on their role in the company and the nature of the irregularities. Are we talking accounting errors or actual crimes? Potentially the latter. Money moving through shell companies, unusual profit margins, offshore accounts. She sipped her coffee before responding. If they're not an officer of the company, they might not have a legal obligation to report, but they should be careful about becoming an accessory after the fact. She paused. This hypothetical person, do they have any documentation? I nodded slightly. Beginning to, not enough to draw conclusions yet. Then I'd advise them to proceed with extreme caution. Powerful families protect themselves aggressively. Her voice lowered. And if this hypothetical situation involves who I think it might, they're known for being particularly ruthless with perceived threats. On my drive back to the Cooper mansion, I made a decision. I would continue building my company as planned. That would be my financial independence, my legitimate achievement. But I would also begin a parallel investigation, documenting everything I found about the Cooper family's financial dealings. I wasn't sure what I would do with the information yet, but knowledge was power, and I had lived too long feeling powerless in the gilded cage of my marriage. The opportunity to expand my investigation came unexpectedly the following month. Harriet hosted her annual charity gala at the Cooper estate, bringing together Seattle's wealthiest families and the politicians they influenced. During dinner, I overheard a conversation between Ryan and a state senator I'd seen at several family events. "The zoning commission won't be an issue," the senator was saying quietly. "I've spoken with Peterson. He understands the importance of the development moving forward without environmental reviews." Ryan nodded, sliding a small envelope across the table. "The campaign contribution we discussed. I'm sure the Cooper family's support will be valuable. In the upcoming election cycle," I maintained my pleasant expression while cataloging the exchange. Later that night, I researched the zoning commission and discovered the Coopers had a major commercial development planned in a sensitive wetland area, a project that would normally require extensive environmental review. The pieces were beginning to connect. Money laundering, political bribes, regulatory evasion. The Cooper empire wasn't just wealthy, it was corrupt to its core. As my company grew, so did my secret investigation. I created an encrypted database of suspicious transactions, political connections, and regulatory coincidences. I recorded dates, times, and participants in conversations that crossed ethical and legal lines. I purchased a waterproof case and secured it in the hidden compartment I'd built in my closet. The one place I was certain wasn't under surveillance. Inside, I kept hard drives with encrypted backups, burner phones, and cash for emergencies. 9 months after discovering the Osaka discrepancy, my company secured our first major contract, a nationwide retailer implementing our system across their supply chain. The initial license fee alone was $12 million. Horizon Innovations was no longer just a promising startup. We were a legitimate player in enterprise software. The same week, I discovered something far more disturbing than financial crimes within the Cooper empire. Daniel had been acting increasingly erratic, withdrawn one moment, aggressively confident the next. After family meetings, he would return, with altered speech patterns and decision-making abilities. I began documenting these changes, creating a timeline of behavioral shifts. The breakthrough came during the Cooper Holdings annual retreat at their Lake Chelan compound. I had excused myself from an afternoon boat excursion, claiming a migraine. While the family was out on the lake, I used the opportunity to access Harriet's private study, a room that was normally kept locked. Inside, I found financial records similar to those I'd been tracking, but also something unexpected: medical files for Daniel dating back to his father's death 7 years earlier. The files referenced cognitive restructuring and behavioral alignment protocols overseen by Dr. Lawrence Finch. Monthly reports detailed Daniel's progress in accepting directive control from authorized handlers, primarily Harriet. There were notes about resistance points, breakthrough sessions, and maintenance protocols involving both psychological techniques and what appeared to be medication. My hands trembled as I photographed the documents. This wasn't just financial corruption. This was something far more sinister: the systematic breaking and rebuilding of my husband's personality to serve family interests. I remembered how different Daniel had been when we first met: passionate about architectural photography, often challenging his mother's business decisions, talking about traveling the world together. Those qualities had gradually disappeared, replaced by compliance and corporate focus. I had attributed the changes to natural maturation and business pressures. Now I understood the horrifying truth. The man I married had been systematically erased and reprogrammed through sophisticated psychological manipulation. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I studied his face in the dim light filtering through the windows. Somewhere beneath the programmed responses and conditioned behaviors was the man I had fallen in love with. A man who had dreams beyond the Cooper legacy. A man who had been taken from me as surely as if he had died. In that moment, my mission changed. This was no longer just about building my own success or even exposing financial crimes. This was about justice for Daniel and anyone else damaged by the Cooper family's ruthless pursuit of power and control. The next morning, I called Sophia from a burner phone while walking alone on the compound's extensive grounds. "I need to speak with someone from the FBI," I said without preamble. "And the Securities Exchange Commission. I have evidence of serious financial crimes, and something worse." "Morgan?" Sophia's voice turned grave. "Are you certain about this? Once you start down this road—" "I'm certain," I replied, watching Harriet and Ryan on the terrace in the distance, heads bent together, in conversation. "But I need time to gather more evidence, enough that they can't make it disappear." "I have contacts," Sophia said after a pause. "But you need to be extraordinarily careful. If they suspect you're investigating them—" She didn't need to finish. The thought. We both knew what powerful families did to threats. Back in Seattle, I approached my company's board with a proposal for accelerated expansion. With our initial success, we needed additional capital to scale operations and development. The board approved a Series B funding round that valued Horizon Innovations at $85 million just 18 months after our seed round. I used the business success to justify more time away from Cooper obligations, claiming meetings with investors and clients. In reality, I was building my case against the Cooper empire, piece by carefully documented piece. I met with Agent Teresa Diaz of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division at a hotel in Portland, far enough from Seattle to avoid accidental discovery. Sophia had vetted her thoroughly, confirming her reputation for integrity and her history of successfully prosecuting influential figures. "What you're describing is a RICO case," Agent Diaz said after I'd outlined my findings. "Racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, bribery, possibly even human trafficking if the behavioral modification involves coercion. Human trafficking? I echoed, the term shocking me despite everything I'd uncovered. Moving people across state lines for illegal purposes, she clarified. If they're transporting people to this Lake Chelan compound for non-consensual psychological manipulation, that potentially qualifies. She studied the preliminary evidence I'd provided. This is compelling, but we need more, especially on the behavioral modification aspect. That's the most disturbing element. Dr. Lawrence Finch is the key, I said. He oversees whatever they're doing to Daniel and potentially others. Monthly payments of $25,000 for executive consulting, regular sessions at both the Seattle office and the Lake compound. Agent Diaz nodded. We'll look into his background discreetly. Meanwhile, continue gathering financial evidence, banking records, transactions, communications about these deals. She hesitated. Ms. Taylor, I have to ask, how are you protecting yourself during this investigation? I explained my security measures, the hidden compartment, encrypted files, burner phones, the careful maintenance of my Cooper wife persona. They don't see me as a threat, I concluded. Just a decorative accessory to Daniel's position. That's an advantage, she agreed. But don't underestimate them. If they've gone to these lengths with your husband, they won't hesitate to take extreme measures if they suspect you're working against them. Over the next year, I executed a delicate balancing act. By day, I was Morgan Cooper, supportive wife, charity board member, perfect society hostess. In stolen moments, I was Morgan Taylor, tech CEO growing a company valued at over $200 million after our Series C round. And in the shadows, I was something else entirely. An undercover investigator building a case that would destroy one of Seattle's most powerful families. I documented every suspicious transaction, recorded conversations at family gatherings, using sophisticated equipment hidden in jewelry, photographed documents during the brief moments I could access them. Each piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged and backed up, with copies securely stored with both Sophia and Agent Diaz. The most damning evidence came from the psychological manipulation program. I managed to place a tiny recording device in Daniel's home office during one of his executive coaching sessions with Dr. Finch. The recording captured explicit discussions of reinforcing compliance behaviors and suppressing independent decision-making. Finch's clinical voice described Daniel's resistance points and how to overcome them through a combination of pharmaceutical intervention and psychological conditioning. Harriet's voice appeared midway through the session, asking about triggering the shutdown protocol if Daniel began showing signs of reverting to previous patterns. When I played the recording for Agent Diaz during our next meeting, her normally composed expression gave way to genuine shock. "This is beyond anything I expected," she said quietly. "This isn't just financial crime. This is systematic abuse." "Can you build a case on this?" I asked. "With more evidence like this, absolutely. But we need to be strategic about when we move. The Coopers have political connections at the state and federal level. We need an airtight case before we take action." As I drove back to Seattle, a new text appeared on my Cooper wife phone. "Special anniversary celebration in planning stages. 5 years is a significant milestone. Harriet." 5 years. The magic number specified in the Pacific Northwest Trust, the Cooper family trust established by Daniel's grandfather, the trust that would give Daniel control of over $300 million in assets once he completed 5 years of stable marriage with appropriate family representation. I had discovered the trust documents during my investigation, including the clauses Harriet had never mentioned to me. Daniel's grandfather had been surprisingly progressive for his era, including provisions that the trust beneficiary must demonstrate sound, independent judgment and ethical business practices consistent with family values. Clauses that would disqualify Daniel if he was under psychological control or involved in the family's criminal enterprises. I now understood the timeline. Our 5th anniversary was approaching in 3 months. The trust disbursement would follow shortly after. Harriet needed to maintain the facade of our perfect marriage until then, ensuring Daniel received the funds that would ultimately flow into her control through her influence over him. What would happen after the disbursement? The trust held. No further requirements once the funds were transferred. A divorce immediately after would raise no red flags from a financial perspective. A chill ran through me as I realized the implications. Once the trust dispersed, I would become a liability rather than an asset. My purpose in their scheme would be fulfilled. That evening, as I dressed for yet another Cooper family dinner, I studied Daniel as he mechanically prepared for the evening. The changes in him had become so pronounced that I wondered how I hadn't recognized the manipulation earlier. His conversations followed predictable patterns, his opinions perfectly aligned with Harriet's stated positions. Even his posture changed in her presence, straightening, becoming more rigid. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you remember our trip to Bali, before we were married?" A flicker of something, confusion, perhaps memory, crossed his face before his expression smoothed back to neutral pleasantness. "Of course, it was very relaxing. You wanted to photograph the terraced rice fields at dawn," I pressed. "You said the light there was unlike anywhere else in the world." He blinked rapidly, his hand rising to rub his temple, a gesture I cataloged as occurring when programmed responses conflicted with genuine memories. "I don't really take photographs anymore. Too busy with the business." "You loved photography," I said, watching him carefully. "You talked about showing your work in galleries." His breathing changed, becoming slightly erratic. "That was impractical?" "Mother helped me see that my talents were better applied to the family business." "Your mother," I repeated softly. "Or Dr. Finch?" Daniel's face went completely blank for 3 seconds, a response I'd documented following. Mentions of the doctor in non-approved contexts. Then he smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "We should leave soon. Mother doesn't like to be kept waiting." As we drove to dinner, I finalized my plan. I had 3 months until our anniversary. 3 months to complete my evidence gathering, coordinate with federal authorities, and prepare for whatever the Coopers had planned for me. Horizon Innovations continued its meteoric rise during those critical months. We secured contracts with 3 more major retailers and expanded into healthcare supply chain management. Our valuation after an emergency funding round reached $340 million, with my ownership stake worth approximately $210 million through the complex ownership structure Sophia had established. I now had more personal wealth than Daniel would receive from his trust disbursement, a fact that gave me grim satisfaction. While the Coopers had been focused on controlling Daniel and maintaining their corrupt empire, I had built something legitimate and valuable right under their noses. Agent Diaz and I established a contingency plan. If anything happened to me, a comprehensive evidence package would automatically be sent to multiple federal agencies and news outlets. I wore a medical alert bracelet that monitored my vital signs and would trigger if they indicated distress or ceased altogether. "We're almost ready to move," Agent Diaz told me during our final meeting before the anniversary. "But the psychological manipulation evidence is the most compelling and disturbing component. If we could document an actual triggering event." I understood what she was suggesting. "You need to see it happen. The conditioning in action." She nodded reluctantly. "It would make the case irrefutable. But I'm not asking you to put yourself at risk." "What if they're planning something at the anniversary celebration?" I mused. "Harriet has been unusually involved in the planning, insisting on controlling every detail. If you suspect they might trigger Daniel at the event, we need to have agents in position," Diaz said. "Not just for evidence collection, but for your safety." On the morning of our anniversary, I stood at the window of our Lake Washington mansion, watching dawn break over the water. In a few hours, I would attend my company's board meeting as Morgan Taylor, CEO. That evening, I would attend my anniversary celebration as Morgan Cooper, wife, potentially for the last time. I didn't know exactly what Harriet had planned, but I had prepared for every contingency I could imagine. My evidence was secured, federal agents would be positioned nearby, and the truth about the Cooper empire was ready to be revealed. As I watched the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened that night would set events in motion that could not be stopped. The empire built on corruption and control would face justice. Daniel stirred in the bed behind me. For a moment, watching him in the soft morning light, I allowed myself to remember the man I had fallen in love with, before the manipulation had turned him into someone else entirely. I wondered if that man still existed somewhere beneath the programming, and if he could ever be recovered. That was a question for another day. Tonight, I had an empire to bring down. As I turned from the window, my phone buzzed with a text from Harriet. Special announcement tonight at 9 p.m. Make sure Daniel is properly prepared. The final confirmation I needed. Whatever they had planned, it would happen at 9 p.m. I sent a pre-arranged code to Agent Diaz, confirming the timing. Tonight, the perfect facade would shatter, and the truth would finally be exposed. The waterfront grill shimmered against the darkening Seattle skyline, its glass and steel architecture capturing the last rays of sunset. I watched from the town, car as we approached, mentally cataloging every detail of the evening ahead. The restaurant had secured the entire rooftop terrace for our anniversary celebration. Impossible for normal patrons with its 3-month waiting list, but trivial for the Cooper name. Mrs. Cooper. The valet's deference was instant as our car pulled up. The family has already arrived. Of course they had. Harriet would have ensured she was in position well before our entrance. Control of the narrative began with controlling the space. Daniel helped me from the car, his movements precise but empty of genuine emotion. He hadn't commented on my burgundy Valentino, the silent rebellion against Harriet's blue directive. 5 years ago, he would have noticed immediately, perhaps whispered appreciatively in my ear, or traced his fingers along the fabric at my waist. Tonight, he registered nothing beyond his programmed tasks. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm, mechanically. I smiled, slipping into the role I'd perfected. "Of course, darling." The private elevator ascended smoothly to the rooftop. I used those seconds to center myself, feeling the weight of my phone in my clutch purse, knowing that one button press would activate the evidence distribution protocol and alert Agent Diaz to move in. Everything I'd built over years, both my company and my case against the Coopers, reached its culmination tonight. "You seem tense," Daniel observed, but the observation lacked genuine concern. It was a programmed response to detected physical cues, a simulation of empathy rather than the real thing. "Just excited," I replied, studying his profile in the elevator's soft lighting. It's not every day we celebrate 5 years of marriage. 5 years. The magic threshold for the trust disbursement that had driven everything. Our courtship, our wedding, Harriet's elaborate performance of maternal affection, all building to this moment when Daniel would gain access to over $300 million in family assets that Harriet intended to control through her psychological hold over her son. The elevator doors opened onto a breathtaking scene. The glass-enclosed rooftop showcased panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond, now fading into twilight shadows. White orchids, Harriet's signature flower, adorned every surface. Crystal chandeliers hung from invisible wires, creating the illusion of stars suspended over the gathering. A string quartet played subtle classical music in the corner. And positioned with military precision throughout the space were approximately 50 guests, Seattle's power elite, carefully selected by Harriet to witness whatever spectacle she had orchestrated for tonight. "Happy anniversary!" The collective greeting washed over us as we stepped onto the terrace. I cataloged the faces: the mayor, 2 state senators, Tech executives, bank presidents, real estate developers. Not one person I'd consider a genuine friend. Not one person who wasn't connected to the Cooper business interests. Harriet glided forward, resplendent in midnight blue Chanel, her silver bob gleaming under the chandeliers. At 62, she remained striking, a woman whose ruthlessness was matched only by her skill at concealing it. "Morgan, darling," she embraced me, air kissing near my cheek, her Hermes perfume enveloping me like chloroform. "You look vibrant," she said, registering my burgundy rebellion with narrowed eyes before her social mask slipped back into place. Though blue photographs so much better for family portraits. "I wanted to surprise everyone," I replied, matching her steel with silk. Her eyes flashed, the first authentic response I'd seen from her in months. "You certainly have a talent for surprises." The comment carried a subtle threat, quickly masked as she linked her arm through mine. "Everyone important is here tonight. We've so much to celebrate." She led me through the crowd, a victory parade for her social triumph, the continued alliance between the Cooper fortune and the perfectly groomed wife she'd selected for her son. I smiled and greeted each person with practiced warmth, cataloging their associations with Cooper business interests in my mental database. Bank president Gordon Mitchell, whose institution had approved unusual loans for Cooper developments without standard due diligence. State Senator Elliott James, who had pushed through regulatory exemptions for 3 Cooper projects after receiving substantial campaign contributions. Judge Patricia Coleman, who had ruled favorably in 2 Cooper lawsuits under questionable circumstances. Not colleagues or friends, accomplices. Champagne for the anniversary couple. Ryan appeared at my elbow with 2 crystal flutes. Daniel's cousin and the family's legal fixer had been unusually present in recent weeks. His Harvard-educated drawl stretched thin over something urgent whenever he spoke to Harriet or Dr. Finch. I accepted without drinking, noting how Ryan's eyes darted to the entrance where a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit was being escorted in. Dr. Lawrence Finch had arrived, the architect of Daniel's psychological prison and a crucial piece of evidence in the federal case I'd been building. "Excuse me?" Ryan murmured, moving to intercept the doctor. A server offering canapes provided perfect cover for me to drift closer to their conversation. "Timeline has accelerated," Ryan was saying, his back to the party. "The announcement needs to happen tonight, before complications arise." "The conditioning may not hold under stress," Finch replied, his clinical tone unmistakable even in hushed conversation. "We've been pushing the dosage to maintain compliance." "We don't have a choice," Ryan hissed. "The trust disbursement happens next week. If her investigation continues—" They noticed my proximity and shifted smoothly to greetings. Finch's handshake was brief, his eyes assessing me with clinical detachment. "Mrs. Cooper, congratulations on your anniversary," he said. "You look radiant this evening." "Thank you, Dr. Finch," I replied. "I'm surprised to see you here. Daniel never mentioned you were invited." A flash of something? Concern? Calculation? I crossed his face before he smiled thinly. "The Coopers are more like family than clients. I've been working with Daniel for years on executive performance optimization." "Performance optimization," I repeated, letting the words hang between us. "Fascinating work, I imagine." He shifted slightly, professional discomfort bleeding through his composure. "It's a specialized field." "I'm sure it is," I agreed pleasantly. "The techniques must be quite progressive to achieve such dramatic results." His eyes narrowed fractionally. "Each client has unique needs. And unique responses to treatment," I added, maintaining eye contact until he looked away first. As I moved through the party over the next hour, I felt Harriet's gaze, following me, calculating my every interaction. Something in my conversation with Finch had unsettled them both. Perhaps the recognition that I wasn't as oblivious as they'd assumed. I checked my phone discreetly, confirming that Agent Diaz and her team were in position. 3 agents had secured service positions within the restaurant staff, with backup units and vehicles nearby. Everything was ready. "Morgan, darling." Amanda Richardson, wife of a major Seattle developer, approached with practiced warmth. "5 years with Daniel. You must be so proud of everything the family has accomplished." The emphasis on family rather than marriage was telling. In their world, the Cooper dynasty was the achievement, the personal relationship merely a vehicle for business advancement. "It's been an enlightening 5 years," I replied carefully. "Harriet has been singing your praises," Amanda continued. "She tells us you've really grown into the Cooper way of doing things." "I've certainly learned a great deal about how the family operates," I agreed, the double meaning clear only to myself. As servers began guiding guests toward the elaborately set dinner tables, I felt a hand at my elbow, Daniel performing his dutiful husband role with mechanical precision. "Mother has arranged the seating," he said, leading me toward the head. "Table positioned to showcase the Seattle skyline through the glass walls behind us." Harriet had orchestrated the seating with tactical precision. Daniel to my right, her at the head of the table, Dr. Finch positioned directly across from me, his gaze clinically assessing every interaction between Daniel and me. Ryan was seated on Harriet's other side, with key allies strategically placed around us. As we took our seats, I noticed small gift boxes at each place setting, Harriet's signature party favors, always expensive and tasteful. I opened mine to find a platinum bracelet engraved with the Cooper family crest. A beautiful handcuff. "Do you like it?" Harriet asked, watching my reaction closely. "I had them made specially for our closest friends and family. A symbol of permanent connection to the Cooper legacy." I smiled, slipping it onto my wrist. "It's beautiful, Harriet. How thoughtful." Daniel stared at the bracelet, something flickering in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of another chain being secured. Harriet tapped her crystal glass, silencing conversation. "Before we dine, a toast to Morgan and Daniel," she stood, commanding. The room with practiced authority. 5 years ago, my son brought home this brilliant, beautiful woman, and I knew immediately she was special. Her eyes met mine, warm on the surface, glacial beneath. Morgan has become everything the Cooper family values, loyal, discreet, and committed to our legacy. The gathering murmured approval. I maintained my grateful smile while translating her actual message. "You've served your purpose." To Morgan and Daniel, Harriet raised her glass. "May this anniversary mark the beginning of a transformative new chapter." The word hung in the air like a promise, or a threat. As servers presented the first course, Harriet glided behind my chair, resting manicured hands on my shoulders. To onlookers, a maternal gesture. I felt the predatory pressure of her grip. "Everything is perfect tonight," she murmured, her voice carrying just to my ears. "And after dinner, Daniel's special announcement will secure the family's future. We've worked so long for this moment." Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on my shoulder before she moved away, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the distinct impression of a trap about to spring. I glanced at Daniel, finding his eyes fixed on his water, glass, fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern I had documented in my notes. A behavior that always followed Harriet's private conversations with him. Whatever they had planned for tonight was accelerating. Throughout dinner, I maintained my role flawlessly. The attentive wife, the grateful daughter-in-law, the perfect Cooper accessory. I engaged in pleasant conversation with the bank president about Seattle's housing market, discussed charity initiatives with the mayor's wife, laughed at a state senator's carefully rehearsed jokes. All while watching the clock approach 9 o'clock, Harriet's designated time for Daniel's announcement. At precisely 8:45, servers cleared the dessert plates, and staff began arranging a small podium near the terrace railing, with the Seattle skyline glittering behind it. The string quartet stopped playing, and the lighting shifted subtly, focusing attention on the podium area. Harriet nodded to the waitstaff, who began pouring champagne for a toast. Perfect staging for whatever theater she had scripted. Before coffee, we have a special presentation, Harriet announced, gesticulating for Daniel to join her at the podium. As he rose mechanically, I noticed Dr. Finch shift forward slightly in his chair, watching with clinical interest. Ryan moved closer, to the terrace entrance, effectively blocking it. Whatever was coming, they were positioning themselves strategically. I touched my phone in my clutch, confirming it was ready to record. The federal agents I'd been working with were in position, waiting for my signal. Daniel took his position, at the podium, his face oddly blank. Harriet stood just behind his left shoulder, her hand resting proprietarily on his back. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our anniversary," Daniel began, his voice flat despite the formal words. "The past 5 years with Morgan have been—" He paused, and I saw Harriet's fingers press into his shoulder blade. A physical cue. "A chapter that must now close for the good of the Cooper legacy," he continued, the strange phrasing causing a ripple of confused murmurs. Around the terrace, phones were raised, recording the moment. Perfect. "Recent discoveries have forced a difficult decision," Daniel continued, each word measured, programmed. "Morgan has betrayed the family's trust." Gasps rippled through the gathering. This was not the expected anniversary speech. Evidence has revealed her investigation into family matters, unauthorized access to confidential documents, and communications with federal authorities. The collective intake of breath was audible. Harriet's expression remained calm, satisfied even, as she watched for my reaction. I remained seated, watching the scene unfold with clinical detachment, much as I imagined Dr. Finch was doing from across the table. This was exactly what Agent Diaz had needed. Irrefutable evidence of Daniel's programming, captured on dozens of phones. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am filing for divorce on grounds of corporate espionage and breach of trust," Daniel concluded, his eyes completely vacant. The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to me, waiting. For tears, protests, collapse. Instead, I slowly stood, smoothing the burgundy fabric of my dress. "That's quite an announcement, Daniel," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "Perhaps you'd care to elaborate on this alleged investigation?" Harriet stepped forward. "We have proof, Morgan. Your secret meetings, your hidden communications, the documents you've been collecting." "How thorough of you," I replied, noting with satisfaction that every phone in the room was still recording. "And what exactly do you think I've discovered?" Uncertainty flickered across Harriet's face. This wasn't following her script. The disgraced wife was supposed to crumble, not challenge. "Daniel," Harriet snapped, her command voice emerging. She leaned close to his ear, whispering something I couldn't hear from my position. I watched it happen in slow motion. Daniel's eyes went completely vacant, his posture rigid. He reached for his champagne glass, and with a sudden, violent motion, hurled it toward my head. The crystal shattered against the wall inches from me, champagne splashing across my face and dress. "I want a divorce," he hissed, the words hollow and programmed. "You've betrayed us all." In the frozen moment that followed, I felt an almost supernatural calm settle over me. This was exactly what I had needed, irrefutable proof of the psychological manipulation captured on dozens of phones. I smiled, reaching for my clutch. "Perfect timing, Daniel," I said clearly. "You couldn't have chosen a better moment if you tried." Confusion clouded his features as I retrieved my phone. With one press of a button, I activated the program I'd prepared months ago. The evidence package was now transmitting to the FBI, the SEC, and selected journalists at the Seattle Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal. You should all check your phones, I told the gathering. You've just received some interesting information about the Cooper family business practices. Ryan lunged for my phone but froze as notifications began chiming throughout the room. The guests, Seattle's elite who had been recording what they thought would be my humiliation, were now receiving documented evidence of the Cooper family's crimes. "What have you done?" Harriet hissed, her composure cracking for the first time. "Exactly what you trained me to do," I replied calmly. "Protect myself by gathering leverage. I learned from the best, after all." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by something I'd never seen there before: fear. I turned to address the increasingly agitated crowd. "For those checking your phones, yes, that evidence package is authentic. What you've just witnessed is the culmination of a 3-year investigation into one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in Seattle." Judge Coleman was already backing toward the exit. Senator James was frantically texting someone. The mayor looked physically ill. The Cooper Foundation has laundered approximately $280 million through its charitable programs, I continued conversationally. Diverting funds intended for education initiatives into offshore accounts controlled by shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. I locked eyes with each powerful figure in the room as I spoke, ensuring they understood their complicity was also documented. That money funded bribes to public officials, manipulated regulatory decisions, and financed the psychological control program you just witnessed in action. Harriet's composure was unraveling visibly now, her perfectly manicured hand clutching at her throat where a pulse hammered beneath her diamond necklace. "You have no proof," she insisted, but her eyes darted to Dr. Finch, who had begun inching toward the exit. "Dr. Finch," I called out, stopping him in his tracks. "Perhaps you'd care to explain to everyone the meaning of Project Clarity, the behavioral modification program you've been implementing on Daniel since his father died?" Finch froze, his clinical detachment vanishing as 50 pairs of eyes turned to him. "That's privileged therapeutic information," he stammered, clinging to professional jargon as a shield. "Therapeutic?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call conditioning someone to respond to specific physical and verbal triggers? Programming responses that override their conscious will?" I gestured to Daniel, who had sunk into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "Would you like to explain the monthly payments of $25,000 categorized as behavioral maintenance in the Cooper's private ledgers?" I turned back to the gathering. My evidence package, which has now been received by the FBI, SEC, and several major news outlets, contains over 1,800 documents detailing financial fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation, and the psychological abuse of Daniel Cooper to maintain family control over his trust fund. Ryan stepped forward, adopting his most authoritative legal tone. "These are wild accusations from a disgruntled wife. If there were any truth to them, the Westlake acquisition was financed with laundered money moved through 3 shell companies," I interrupted, naming a deal that had made headlines the previous year. "The documents include the original wire transfers, the falsified loan applications, and the exact trading patterns that followed." Ryan's confident expression faltered as I named the specific transaction. "The charitable donation to Seattle Children's Hospital last year?" I continued relentlessly. 82% of those funds were redirected through a series of foundations before landing in an account controlled by Harriet Cooper in Zurich. I met Harriet's gaze directly. "Account number 72638491003A, opened under the name Helena Martin, your maternal grandmother's maiden name." The specificity of the details silenced any further objections. Around the room, phones were now being used not just to read the evidence I'd sent, but to search for corroborating information and place frantic calls to attorneys. The elevator doors opened, revealing Agent Diaz and 3 other FBI agents who surveyed the scene with professional detachment. "Perfect timing," I noted, recognizing my primary contact from the bureau. "I believe several people here are eager to make statements." The FBI agents moved efficiently, securing the exits while introducing themselves to the increasingly agitated crowd. Agent Diaz approached Harriet, displaying her credentials. "Mrs. Cooper, we have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and documents in your possession," she stated, her tone professionally neutral as she presented the paperwork. Harriet's hand trembled as she took the document, her eyes scanning it with desperate intensity. Finding no escape clause, she turned to Ryan, who had already begun backing away from her. "This is absurd," she insisted, but her voice had lost its authoritative edge. "Do you know who I am, who we are?" "That's precisely why we're here, Mrs. Cooper," Agent Diaz replied calmly. Around us, the elegant anniversary celebration had transformed into a scene of barely contained chaos. Servers stood frozen, champagne bottles still in hand, as Seattle's elite began their strategic retreats. Daniel remained seated, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The horror of his action, throwing the champagne glass, had visibly broken through the conditioning temporarily. I approached him cautiously, conscious of the unpredictability of his programmed responses. "Daniel," I said softly, maintaining a safe distance, "what's happening isn't your fault. You've been under behavioral manipulation for years." His eyes found mine, clearer than I'd seen them in months. "The headaches after meetings with Mother," he murmured. "The missing time. The changes in my decisions that I couldn't explain." His voice trailed off, then strengthened. "Did I really throw that glass at you?" "It wasn't you," I said firmly. "It was a programmed response triggered by your mother's command." Across the room, I could see Dr. Finch already deep in conversation with another FBI agent, his clinical detachment replaced by nervous self-preservation. "How long have you known?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. "About the financial crimes?" "Almost 3 years," I admitted. "About the psychological manipulation? Nearly 2. It took time to gather enough evidence to ensure justice would be served." He stared at me with a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. "Our entire marriage—" "Not all of it," I said, the words emerging softer than I'd intended. "The beginning was real, Daniel, before they intensified the conditioning. That's part of why I stayed. I saw glimpses of who you really were." A terrible recognition washed over his face. "The night I came home from the lake house last summer. I couldn't remember the entire weekend. When I asked questions, Mother gave me tea, and afterward I stopped caring about the missing time." He looked up at me, genuine anguish breaking through. "What else have they made me do?" Before I could answer, Agent Diaz approached us. "Mr. Cooper, we'll need to take a statement from you as well, though primarily as a victim in this case." Daniel nodded, his movements less mechanical now that the immediate effects of Harriet's trigger had faded. "I'll cooperate fully. I want to understand what they've done to me." Across the terrace, Harriet was being formally read her rights, her posture still regal despite everything crumbling around her. Ryan was negotiating with another agent, his legal mind already calculating the benefits of early cooperation. Dr. Finch sat alone at a table, writing what appeared to be a detailed statement. The perfect anniversary celebration had transformed into the beginning of the Cooper Empire's downfall. Years of manipulation, fraud, and psychological control were being exposed in real time, under the same crystal chandeliers that had been hung to celebrate their continuing dominance. As I watched Seattle's power elite distance themselves from the unfolding scandal, I felt an unexpected emotion surface. Not triumph or vindication, but a profound sadness for Daniel. While I had been building my case and my company, he had been a prisoner in his own mind, his authentic self suppressed through sophisticated psychological techniques. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his voice steadier but vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard in years. "The federal investigation will proceed. I explained gently. There will be trials, testimony, probably plea agreements from people like Ryan and Dr. Finch. The family's financial empire will face intense scrutiny. And me? He asked, the question hanging between us. You'll need specialized treatment. To address the psychological manipulation, I said honestly. There are experts who work with victims of this kind of control. It takes time, but recovery is possible. Around us, the FBI continued methodically documenting the scene, collecting statements and securing evidence. Seattle's most powerful family was being dismantled piece by piece, their crimes exposed to the harsh light of justice. And in that chaos, I made my choice. Despite everything, the years of deception, the glass thrown in anger, the trust that had been irrevocably broken, I couldn't simply abandon Daniel to face the aftermath alone. I can help you understand what they did, I offered, surprising myself. I've documented the techniques, the triggers. It might help with your recovery. Daniel looked up, vulnerability and hope warring with shame in his expression. After what I did to you tonight, why would you help me? I touched my face where champagne had dried in sticky trails, because unlike your family, I can distinguish between the puppets and the puppeteers. Around us, the Cooper Empire continued its spectacular implosion, years of corruption and control exposed to the world they had so carefully manipulated. But amid the ruins, a spark of authentic human connection had survived, offering the possibility of healing after devastation. The night was far from over, but the path forward had become clear. Justice would be served, truth would prevail, and perhaps, in time, genuine recovery might be possible. Not just for Daniel, but for everyone damaged by the Cooper family's toxic legacy of manipulation and control. 3 months after the anniversary celebration, I sat in the federal courthouse watching Harriet Cooper enter in handcuffs. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a prison-issued jumpsuit. Still, she held her head high, refusing to acknowledge the spectators who had come to witness the matriarch's downfall. The courtroom was packed with journalists, former business associates, and most importantly, others who had been victimized by the Cooper family over decades. Some I had found through financial records. Others had come forward after the initial reports broke. Each carried their own story of manipulation, coercion, or financial destruction. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Matsunaga entered, not Judge Coleman, who had recused herself immediately after my anniversary revelation and was now under investigation herself for her role in several questionable Cooper judicial outcomes. The proceedings moved with the inexorable rhythm of justice finally unleashed. The prosecution presented evidence meticulously organized from my files and substantially expanded through the federal investigation that followed. Bank records, witness testimonies, psychological evaluations, the truth laid bare beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Harriet's legal team had crumbled in the preceding months. Ryan Cooper had turned state's evidence almost immediately, prioritizing self-preservation over family loyalty. The prominent defense attorneys initially retained had withdrawn one by one as the depth of the evidence became clear. Now she sat beside a court-appointed defender who seemed overwhelmed by the case's complexity. During a recess, Mark Chen, one of the forensic accountants assigned to the case, approached me in the hallway. "We've traced over $420 million in misappropriated funds," he said quietly. "Your initial estimates were conservative." I nodded, unsurprised. "What about the trust?" "That's the interesting part," Mark replied. The grandfather's original trust document contained ethical operation clauses that the family had suppressed. The court is considering using those original provisions to redirect the assets toward restitution. This development validated my deepest hope, that justice wouldn't just mean punishment for the guilty, but restoration for the harmed. The Cooper fortune, built through generations of manipulation and fraud, would be used to heal the damage they had caused. Outside the courthouse steps each afternoon, I met with former employees, business partners, and even family members who had been pushed aside when they questioned Harriet's methods. Each shared pieces of the puzzle I hadn't known, extending the pattern of abuse and control back decades before my involvement with the family. Jennifer Cooper, Daniel's cousin who had been disinherited at 22 for refusing Harriet's career guidance, became a particularly valuable ally. Her insights into the family dynamics helped prosecutors understand the systematic nature of the psychological manipulation. "They did it to all of us in different ways," she explained during one of our strategy sessions. "But Daniel got the worst of it after his father died. Harriet saw him as the key to everything." Dr. Finch's testimony proved devastating to Harriet's defense. In exchange for immunity, he provided detailed records of the conditioning techniques employed, the specific triggers installed, and Harriet's explicit instructions regarding Daniel's development. The clinical precision of his notes left no room for doubt about the deliberate nature of the psychological abuse. Mrs. Cooper specifically requested that Daniel's natural inclinations toward creative pursuits be suppressed, he testified, his clinical tone unable to mask the disturbing content. "We developed a comprehensive protocol to redirect his interests toward business priorities and ensure compliance with family directives." The courtroom fell silent as photographs were displayed showing the specialized equipment at the Lake Chelan compound, the room where Daniel and potentially others had been subjected to behavioral modification techniques that bordered on brainwashing. "The subject would be given a mild sedative in his evening tea," Finch continued, avoiding looking at Harriet. "Then exposed to a series of visual and auditory cues designed to create associations between independent thinking and discomfort, and between compliance and reward." As distressing as the financial crimes had been, it was the evidence of psychological manipulation that truly shocked the public. News coverage focused increasingly on the Cooper Mind Control Program, with experts weighing in on the ethics and legality of such techniques. Daniel himself was absent from the proceedings, receiving treatment at Meadowbrook, a specialized facility focused on recovery from psychological manipulation. His own legal standing remained complex, both perpetrator and victim. The champagne glass incident that had been the catalyst for the Cooper downfall was being considered in light of the documented conditioning. I visited him once a week, maintaining professional boundaries while providing information that aided his recovery. The man emerging from beneath the layers of programming was thoughtful, uncertain, and grappling with profound guilt over actions taken under his mother's influence. "I don't know who I am without their directives," he confessed during one visit, sitting in the facility's garden where early autumn leaves were beginning to fall. "Even my preferences, foods, clothes, opinions, I'm questioning everything." "That's actually progress," I told him. "The authentic self asks questions. The programmed self follows instructions." He managed a small smile, genuine rather than the practiced expression I'd grown accustomed to during our marriage. "You never stopped questioning, did you?" "Not my nature," I replied simply. What remained unspoken between us was the future of our relationship. The marriage had been built on false premises, manipulated from the start by Harriet's machinations. Yet something authentic had existed briefly, before the deeper programming took hold. Whether that could ever be recovered, or whether it should be, remained an open question neither of us was ready to answer. My own life had transformed completely. I had resigned as CEO of Horizon Innovations, unable to continue running the company while participating in the extensive legal proceedings. The board had unanimously voted to retain me as chairperson, however, acknowledging that without my vision and leadership, the company wouldn't exist. With the settlement funds I received from stepping back from day-to-day operations, I established the Cognitive Liberty Legal Foundation, focusing on cases involving psychological manipulation, coercive control, and financial exploitation. Our first clients were former Cooper employees who had been subjected to NDAs and coercive contracts. "You've essentially created a new practice area," remarked my former Stanford professor when we met for coffee. "Psychological freedom as a legal right." The Foundation's work soon extended beyond legal representation. We developed educational programs for law enforcement, judges, and therapists to recognize signs of psychological manipulation. I partnered with cognitive liberty advocates to push for legislative changes strengthening protections against coercive control. On the day the jury announced their verdict, guilty on all counts, including racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, and psychological abuse, I sat in the back of the courtroom rather than the front. Harriet showed no reaction as the forewoman read the decision, her posture remaining regal despite facing a potential sentence of 30 years in federal prison. The Cooper empire had fallen. Justice had been served. My focus had already shifted to the next case, the next victim needing advocacy. As the courtroom emptied, Daniel approached me. His first appearance at the proceedings since the preliminary hearings. He looked different, thinner, with casual clothes instead of bespoke suits, and eyes that held both sadness and clarity. "The trustees approved the restitution plan," he said without preamble. "Everyone they harmed will receive compensation." "I didn't do this for money," I replied. "I know," he hesitated. "That's why I asked them to direct my personal share to your foundation instead. It seems fitting that what they intended to control me with should be used to free others." The gesture represented something profound, an act of autonomous choice, perhaps the first truly independent decision he had made in decades. "Thank you," I said simply. We stood there briefly, two people forever changed by the same corrupting influence, now finding separate paths toward redemption. "Your foundation's work," he started, then paused. "I'd like to help when I'm further along in recovery. My experience might be useful to others." "It might," I agreed. As we parted ways outside the courthouse, neither making promises about the future, I realized that the Cooper saga had never been just about exposing corruption or seeking personal vengeance. It had become something far more meaningful, a reclamation of authentic selfhood from those who would program human beings like software. The path ahead would be challenging, with more powerful families and institutions to confront. But with each case, each client, each small victory, I was building something that Harriet Cooper, with all her wealth and influence, had never possessed. A legacy of liberation rather than control. That, perhaps, was the most perfect form of justice. 6 months after Harriet's conviction, I stood at the podium addressing the Washington State Senate Judiciary Committee. Behind me sat dozens of survivors of psychological manipulation and coercive control, each wearing a small purple ribbon symbolizing cognitive liberty. The techniques used by the Cooper family weren't unique, I testified. They represent an evolution of coercive control that our legal system is ill-equipped to address. Traditional frameworks of consent and autonomy fail to capture how sophisticated manipulation can override an individual's authentic choices. Senator Williams leaned forward. "You're suggesting we need new legal frameworks specifically addressing psychological manipulation?" "Exactly," I confirmed. "When we discovered that Harriet Cooper had used behavioral modification techniques on her son, we had to rely on laws designed for physical abuse and financial fraud. There was no clear statute addressing the systematic erasure of someone's autonomy. The legislation we were proposing, the Cognitive Liberty Protection Act, would create new legal standards for identifying and prosecuting psychological manipulation. It would also establish funding for treatment programs and victim support services." After my testimony, Rebecca Chen, one of the Foundation's clients and a former Cooper Holdings employee, shared her experience of being systematically isolated and manipulated until she believed she couldn't function without the company's approval. "They controlled everything: who I could talk to, what information I received, even what medications I took," she explained, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "When I finally escaped, I had to rebuild my entire sense of reality. The committee members listened with growing concern as 7 more survivors testified, each describing different techniques but similar patterns of control and exploitation. As we left the Capitol building that afternoon, Daniel was waiting on the steps. In the months since the trial, he had continued his treatment at Meadowbrook while beginning to volunteer with the foundation, sharing his perspective as both a victim and unwitting perpetrator of psychological manipulation. "How did it go?" he asked, falling into step beside me. "Better than expected," I replied. "Senator Williams thinks we have the votes to move it forward to the full Senate." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I spoke with Dr. Harrison this morning. She thinks I'm ready to begin testifying myself." Dr. Melissa Harrison was Daniel's current therapist, specializing in recovery from coercive control. Unlike Dr. Flinch, she focused on helping Daniel reconnect with his authentic preferences and rebuild his capacity for independent decision-making. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked. "The public exposure will be intense." "I need to do this," he said simply. "Not just for the legislation, but for myself. I can't keep hiding from what happened." We walked in companionable silence through the Capitol grounds, the late spring sunshine warming the air. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted, not reconciliation exactly, but a partnership founded on shared purpose and mutual respect. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, a clean break legally while we each continued our separate healing journeys. Daniel had moved into a modest apartment in Capitol Hill, deliberately choosing a lifestyle different from the Cooper family's opulence. I had purchased a small house near Green Lake, with a garden that was becoming my weekend sanctuary. "There's something else," Daniel said as we reached my car. "I've been talking with Jennifer about the Cooper Foundation properties. After Harriet's conviction, the courts had seized most Cooper assets for restitution, but several charitable foundation properties remained in legal limbo. The Lake Chelan compound," he continued. "We want to transform it into a recovery center for survivors of psychological manipulation. Turn the place where they broke people into somewhere that people can heal." The symmetry of the proposal struck me immediately. The lakeside compound where Daniel and others had been subjected to behavioral modification techniques becoming a sanctuary for recovery and reclamation of self. "That's perfect," I said finally. "I hoped you'd think so," he replied. "We'd like the Cognitive Liberty Foundation to be part of the planning process." As we discussed preliminary ideas for the center, I observed Daniel carefully. The changes in him over these months had been remarkable. The programmed responses had gradually given way to authentic reactions. He spoke more freely, laughed more readily, and most significantly, had begun to express disagreement when his perspective differed from others. Dr. Harrison had explained that recovery from long-term psychological manipulation wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, confusion, and periods of disorientation as Daniel's authentic self emerged from beneath the conditioning. But each autonomous choice strengthened his cognitive independence. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Daniel said as we finished outlining plans for the recovery center. "I've been thinking about going back to photography." Before meeting his mother's expectations for a business career, Daniel had been an aspiring architectural photographer, with a particular interest in historic buildings. It had been one of the first interests Harriet and Dr. Flinch had suppressed through their conditioning program. "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "You were talented." "Were?" he questioned with a small smile. "I've been practicing again. Nothing serious yet, but—" He pulled out his phone, showing me a series of black and white images of Seattle's skyline at dawn, the light creating dramatic contrasts between old and new structures. "These are beautiful, Daniel," I said, genuinely impressed. The compositions showed a sensitivity and perspective that reflected his authentic eye, not the programmed corporate aesthetic that had dominated during our marriage. "I thought maybe the recovery center could incorporate arts therapy," he suggested. "Photography, painting, music, ways for people to reconnect with their creative selves after being controlled. The idea resonated deeply with what we were learning through the Foundation's work. Creative expression often provided a path back to authentic selfhood for survivors of psychological manipulation. 2 weeks later, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance the Cognitive Liberty Protection Act to the full Senate. The same day, the courts approved our proposal to convert the Lake Chelan compound into a recovery center, with oversight from a board that included mental health professionals, legal experts, and survivors of psychological manipulation. The media coverage of both developments reignited public interest in the Cooper case, bringing fresh attention to the broader issues of psychological manipulation and coercive control. I found myself giving interviews to national news outlets, carefully explaining the distinctions between influence, persuasion, and systematic manipulation. What we're addressing isn't normal social influence, I explained on a prominent morning show. We're talking about deliberate, sustained techniques designed to override someone's capacity for independent thought and replace it with externally imposed directives. The host leaned forward. Some critics suggest this legislation could criminalize persuasive advertising or religious practices. How do you respond? The legislation specifically defines psychological manipulation as involving isolation, information control, dependency creation, and systematic undermining of identity, I clarified. These are distinct from persuasion, which respects autonomy and operates transparently. As public awareness grew, so did the Foundation's caseload. We expanded from 3 attorneys to 12 within 6 months, with specialized teams focusing on corporate, religious, and familial contexts of psychological manipulation. The Lake Chelan Recovery Center opened 8 months after our initial proposal, transformed from a site of trauma to a place of healing. The room where Daniel and others had been subjected to conditioning techniques was now a peaceful meditation space filled with natural light. The basement that had housed monitoring equipment became an art therapy studio. On opening day, standing in the center's main hall overlooking the lake, I felt a sense of completion that transcended the vindication of bringing the Coopers to justice. This tangible transformation, from instruments of control to tools of liberation, represented the heart of what we were working to achieve on a broader social scale. Daniel joined me by the window, camera hanging around his neck. He had documented the center's transformation, creating a powerful before and after narrative that would be exhibited in the main hallway. "I never thought I'd feel peaceful here," he said quietly, gazing out at the water where afternoon light created patterns of gold and blue. "This place only held fear and confusion before." "Reclaiming spaces is powerful," I replied. "It's a physical manifestation of reclaiming ourselves." He nodded, understanding the parallel. "I keep finding pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. Last week, I remembered how much I loved sailing as a teenager before Mother decided it was taking too much time from my studies. These recovered memories had become more frequent as his treatment progressed, authentic preferences and interests re-emerging as the conditioning weakened. Each one represented another aspect of his true self reclaimed from Harriet's systematic erasure. The recovery center's first residents arrived the following week. 12 survivors of various forms of psychological manipulation, from cult involvement to corporate coercive control. Each would receive individualized treatment combining trauma therapy, cognitive restructuring, and expressive arts. I visited weekly, both to observe the program's implementation and to lead discussion groups on rebuilding decision-making capacity after prolonged psychological control. Daniel led photography workshops, teaching residents to use images as a form of self-expression and environmental reclamation. Despite the professional nature of our ongoing connection, I found myself watching Daniel with a complex mixture of emotions. The man emerging from beneath the programming was thoughtful, creative, and genuinely compassionate, qualities I had glimpsed during our courtship before Harriet's conditioning had suppressed them. There were moments when I caught myself wondering what might have been possible between us without Harriet's interference. But I reminded myself that such thinking was ultimately futile. We couldn't rewrite the past. We could only build something meaningful from its ruins. One evening, after a particularly intense group session at the center, Daniel and I found ourselves sitting on the dock as sunset painted the lake in shades of amber and rose. The residents had returned to their cabins for evening reflection time, leaving us alone with the gentle sounds of water lapping against the shore. "I met with Dr. Harrison yesterday," Daniel said after a comfortable silence. "She thinks I'm ready to reduce my sessions to once a month." "That's significant progress," I noted. In therapeutic terms, it represented a major milestone in his recovery, the transition from intensive intervention to maintenance support. He nodded, skimming a stone across the water's surface. "She asked me something interesting, what I want for myself now, independent of what anyone else expects." He paused, watching the ripples expand. I realized I'm still discovering the answer. "That's okay," I assured him. "Finding your authentic preferences takes time after years of having them overridden." "Some things are becoming clearer," he continued. "I know I want to keep working with the foundation and the recovery center. The photography is more than just a hobby now. I'm considering a documentary project on survivors reclaiming their autonomy." He turned slightly to face me, his expression both vulnerable and determined. "And I know I value our connection, whatever form it takes." The simple statement hung between us, acknowledging the complex evolution of our relationship from manipulated marriage to professional collaboration, to something neither of us had yet defined. "I value it too," I replied carefully. "I'm not asking for anything," he clarified. "I just wanted you to know that of all the things I'm sorting through, my appreciation for your role in my freedom is something I'm completely certain about." As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the lake, we sat in companionable silence. The Foundation's work continued to expand, the legislation moved forward in the state Senate, and survivors at the Recovery Center took their first steps toward reclaiming their authentic selves. The Cooper saga had evolved far beyond my original goals of building my own company and exposing financial crimes. It had become a movement for cognitive liberty that was gaining national attention and creating real change in how society understood psychological autonomy. And sitting beside Daniel as twilight settled over Lake Shilan, I recognized that the most profound transformation had occurred within us both. We had each reclaimed our authentic selves from those who sought to control us, him through direct psychological manipulation, me through the more subtle constraints of the role I was expected to play. Whatever the future held, that reclamation of self was a victory that could never be taken away. The following week, I testified before the state Senate as they prepared to vote on the Cognitive Liberty Protection Act. The gallery was filled with supporters wearing purple ribbons, including residents and staff from the Recovery Center. "This legislation doesn't just protect potential victims," I explained in my closing statement. "It affirms a fundamental human right, the right to psychological self-determination. When we allow sophisticated manipulation techniques to override someone's authentic choices, we permit a profound form of harm that leaves no visible bruises, but destroys something essential to human dignity." The vote that followed was decisive, 42-7 in favor of passing the act. As the results were announced, the gallery erupted in applause. For many present, this represented the first legal recognition of the harm they had endured and the first step toward preventing others from suffering similarly. Outside the Senate chamber, surrounded by Foundation staff and supporters, I found myself face to face with Senator James, one of the guests at my anniversary party who had rapidly distanced himself from the Cooper family after their downfall. "Congratulations, Ms. Taylor," he said, extending his hand. "A remarkable achievement." I regarded him steadily, remembering the evidence in my files documenting his acceptance of Cooper donations in exchange for regulatory favors. He had escaped indictment by cooperating with federal prosecutors, but his complicity remained clear. "Thank you, Senator," I replied, accepting his handshake briefly. "I trust you'll be equally supportive when similar legislation reaches the federal level." A flash of discomfort crossed his face before his political mask reasserted itself. Of course, psychological autonomy is a bipartisan value. As he moved away, Daniel appeared at my side, having watched the exchange from a distance. "Politics makes for strange redemption arcs," he observed wryly. "Some more convincing than others," I agreed. We made our way through the Capitol building toward the press conference scheduled on the steps outside. Reporters were already gathering, along with survivors who had agreed to share their stories publicly. "Ready?" Daniel asked as we paused at the top of the stairs. I nodded, surveying the crowd below. Journalists, advocates, survivors, and curious onlookers. What had begun as my solitary mission had grown into a movement larger than any individual story. "Together?" Daniel suggested, offering his arm, in a gesture reminiscent of our public appearances during our marriage, but fundamentally different now, an offering rather than an obligation. "Together," I agreed, accepting the support as we descended the steps toward the waiting cameras. The story of the Cooper family's downfall had captivated public attention for its dramatic revelations of wealth, corruption, and psychological manipulation. But standing beside Daniel at the press conference, I knew that the more important story, the one that would create lasting change, was just beginning. It was the story of reclaiming autonomous selfhood from those who would override it, of creating legal protections for psychological freedom, and of helping survivors rebuild their lives on foundations of authentic choice rather than programmed compliance. That was a story worth telling, and a legacy worth building. 1 year after the passage of the Cognitive Liberty Protection Act in Washington state, I stood in the atrium of the newly opened National Center for Cognitive Liberty in Chicago. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating the interactive exhibits chronicling different forms of psychological manipulation and the emerging movement to protect mental autonomy. "This is even more impressive than the blueprints suggested," remarked Sophia, who had transitioned from my personal attorney to the Foundation's legal director over the past year. "The survivor testimonial space is particularly powerful," I agreed, gesturing toward a circular room where visitors could listen to first-hand accounts of psychological manipulation and recovery. What had begun as my personal mission of justice and self-protection had evolved into a national movement. Following Washington's groundbreaking legislation, 5 additional states had passed similar cognitive liberty protection laws. A federal bill was now moving through congressional committees, with bipartisan support. The center represented our most ambitious project yet, a permanent institution dedicated to education, research, and advocacy around psychological autonomy. Funded through a combination of foundation grants and, ironically, a substantial portion of the court-ordered restitution from the Cooper fortune, the center would serve as both monument and mission control for the growing cognitive liberty movement. "Ms. Taylor?" A young staff member approached. "The panel is ready to begin whenever—" "You are." I nodded, smoothing my blazer, navy blue rather than Cooper burgundy, a deliberate choice as I continued to reclaim my personal aesthetic preferences. "Let's not keep them waiting." The auditorium was filled beyond capacity, with attendees lining the walls and sitting in the aisles. Academics, therapists, legal professionals, survivors, and advocates had gathered for the center's inaugural symposium, Reclaiming the Self, Frontiers in Cognitive Liberty. As I took my place on stage alongside the other panelists, a neuropsychologist, a legal scholar, a former cult member turned advocate, and Daniel, I marveled at how far we had come in such a relatively short time. "Welcome to the National Center for Cognitive Liberty's opening symposium," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art acoustics. Each of us on this stage approaches the concept of cognitive liberty from a different perspective. but we share a common conviction that the right to psychological self-determination is as fundamental as physical freedom. The discussion that followed was nuanced and wide-ranging, covering legal frameworks, therapeutic approaches, technological concerns, and ethical considerations around mental autonomy. As the founder of the movement's most prominent organization, I often served as the panel's moderator, guiding the conversation while encouraging diverse viewpoints. Daniel's contribution focused on the rehabilitation perspective, drawing carefully from his own experience while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. Over the past year, he had completed his formal treatment program and obtained certification as a peer support specialist for survivors of psychological manipulation. The challenge many survivors face, he explained to the rapt audience, is distinguishing between authentic preferences and programmed responses. When someone has systematically overridden your decision-making capacity for years, even simple choices like what to eat for breakfast can become paralyzing. A ripple of recognition moved through the audience, survivors nodding in understanding, professionals leaning forward with increased attention. That's why recovery programs must focus not just on removing harmful programming, but on rebuilding the muscle of autonomous choice, Daniel continued. It's a skill that atrophies under manipulation and must be deliberately strengthened through practice. As I watched him speak with quiet authority, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in his remarkable recovery, professional respect for the insights he brought to our work, and something more personal that I continued to hold carefully, uncertain whether it represented authentic feeling or the echo of what we had once shared. After the panel concluded, we moved to the center's garden terrace for a reception. Spring had arrived early in Chicago, and cherry blossoms floated on the light breeze as attendees networked and continued discussions sparked by the symposium. I found myself surrounded by a small group of law students eager to discuss the implications of cognitive liberty for existing legal frameworks around consent and capacity. The challenge for the courts, I explained, is establishing metrics for something as internal and invisible as psychological autonomy. That's why our legislation focuses on observable manipulation techniques rather than trying to measure autonomy directly. As the students debated this approach, I noticed Daniel across the terrace, deep in conversation with Dr. Eliza Sharma, the neuropsychologist from our panel and a leading researcher in recovery from coercive control. They made a striking pair, Daniel tall and thoughtful, his once rigid corporate posture now more relaxed, Dr. Sharma animated and intense, gesturing as she elaborated some point. I felt an unexpected tightness in my chest at the apparent connection between them. Was it jealousy? The thought surprised me. Our marriage had ended, our romantic relationship thoroughly disrupted by the revelations about his conditioning. Yet, watching him engage with someone else, someone brilliant and accomplished who shared his commitment to cognitive liberty, produced an undeniable emotional response. I excused myself from the law students and moved toward the refreshment table, needing a moment to examine this unexpected reaction. As I reached for a glass of sparkling water, Senator Williams appeared at my side. "Congratulations on the center," she said warmly. "You've accomplished more in 18 months than most advocacy movements achieve in a decade." "Thank you, Senator," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her early support for our legislation. Though I'm more proud of the recovery programs. Buildings are symbolic, but changed lives are the real measure of success. She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been following the outcomes from your Lake Chelan facility. The results are impressive." "They're preliminary," I cautioned, "but promising, especially when intervention happens earlier in the manipulation process." As we discussed the latest recovery statistics, my gaze drifted back to Daniel, who had moved away from Dr. Sharma and was now examining one of the cherry trees with apparent fascination. Senator Williams followed my glance, a knowing expression crossing her face. "He's come a long way," she observed quietly. "He has," I agreed. "And you? How are you navigating your own recovery journey? Her question was gentle but direct, a reminder that I too had experienced a form of manipulation, albeit different from Daniel's conditioning. I considered her question carefully. It's ongoing, I admitted. Building horizon while maintaining the perfect Cooper wife facade required. Splitting myself in ways I'm still reconciling. She nodded understanding. Identity compartmentalization is its own form of psychological fragmentation. Less dramatic than what your ex-husband experienced, perhaps, but significant nonetheless. Her insight struck home. While I had never been subjected to Harriet's direct conditioning program, the years of living a double life had required a fragmentation of self that continued to affect me. The hypervigilance, the constant performance, the strategic calculation of every interaction. These had become so habitual that shedding them remained challenging even in situations where they were no longer necessary. I'm working on integration, I told her, appreciating her perspective. Bringing Morgan Taylor and Morgan Cooper back into a single authentic self. A worthy project, she affirmed, perhaps the most important one any of us undertakes. As the reception continued around us, I found myself reflecting on her observation. My focus had been so completely on external achievements, building my company, gathering evidence, seeking justice, establishing the foundation, creating the center, that I had sometimes neglected my own internal recovery process. Later, that evening, as attendees departed for dinner reservations and hotel rooms, I found myself alone in the center's memorial garden. Designed as a quiet space for reflection, it featured a simple fountain surrounded by stone benches and plant species known for their healing properties. I sat beside the water, listening to its gentle rhythm and watching the last light of day fade from the sky. The center's opening represented a significant milestone, yet I felt an unexpected melancholy beneath my professional satisfaction. Mind if I join you? Daniel's voice broke into my reverie. I looked up, momentarily surprised. Please. I gestured to the space beside me. He sat, leaving a respectful distance between us. For several minutes, we sat in companionable silence, watching the fountain's play of water and light. Successful day, he said finally. You should be proud. We should all be proud, I corrected gently. This has been a collective achievement. He nodded, accepting the amendment. Dr. Sharma was telling me about her new research on neuroplasticity and recovery from conditioning. She believes the brain can rebuild autonomy pathways more completely than previously thought. So they had been discussing research, not making a personal connection. I noted my relief with a mixture of amusement and confusion. That's encouraging news for the recovery programs. It is, he agreed, though she emphasized that authentic connection plays a crucial role in the rebuilding process. Genuine relationships provide a kind of mirror that helps survivors recognize their autonomous selves. I considered this, recalling how my own relationship with Sophia had provided an anchor of authenticity during my years as Morgan Cooper. That aligns with what we're seeing at Lake Chelan. The group component seems as important as individual therapy. Daniel turned slightly toward me, his expression thoughtful. It made me think about us, actually. My pulse quickened slightly. Oh? Despite everything Harriet did, despite the conditioning and manipulation, there were moments when I was with you that I felt glimpses of my authentic self, he said carefully. Even at my most programmed, something about our connection occasionally broke through. I remembered those moments, brief flashes of the real Daniel emerging from beneath the conditioning, usually when we were away from Seattle and the Cooper influence. A laugh that sounded genuine rather than practiced. A spontaneous opinion that contradicted Harriet's position. A tender gesture that felt motivated by actual emotion rather than programmed response. I noticed those moments too, I acknowledged. They became rarer as time passed and the conditioning intensified, but they never disappeared completely. He nodded, a certain tension leaving his shoulders at my confirmation. That's significant, I think. Whatever was authentic between us was strong enough to occasionally override sophisticated psychological manipulation. The observation hung between us, neither of us immediately addressing its implications. "Morgan," he said finally, his voice quiet but clear. "I've been working with Dr. Harrison on distinguishing between programmed responses and authentic feelings. It's challenging, especially around relationships, where so much of my behavior was explicitly conditioned." I nodded, understanding the complexity of his recovery journey. "But I've realized something I'm confident is authentic," he continued. "I value our connection, past and present, and I'd like to explore what might be possible between us now, as two whole autonomous people." His words settled around me like the cherry blossoms that had drifted through the reception earlier. Not a dramatic declaration or pressure-laden proposition, but a simple, honest expression of authentic feeling and desire. "I'm not asking for anything specific," he clarified. "Just openness to possibility. A chance to discover what we might choose freely, without manipulation or obligation." For a moment I sat silently, examining my own complex emotions. The marriage we had shared had been founded on manipulation from the start. Harriet's orchestration, Daniel's conditioning, my secret investigation. Yet within that compromised framework, something genuine had occasionally sparked between us. Could that spark grow into something meaningful now that we were both free from Cooper control? Or would the shadow of our past always darken any potential future? "I value our connection too," I said finally, choosing my words with care. "And I appreciate your transparency about where you are in your journey." I turned to face him directly. "I don't know what might be possible between us romantically. There's a lot of complicated history to navigate. But I'm open to exploring friendship without agenda or expectation and seeing where it might lead." Relief and something like hope crossed his face. "That's all I'm asking for. No pressure, no timelines, just authenticity and openness." As twilight deepened around us, we continued talking about the center, about recovery theories, about our separate lives in Seattle. The conversation flowed naturally, without the performative quality that had characterized so many of our interactions during our marriage. Eventually, we walked together toward the center's exit, where cars waited to take symposium participants to their hotels. "I'm flying back tomorrow afternoon," Daniel said as we paused at the entrance. "But I thought I might visit the Art Institute in the morning. They have a photography exhibition I'd like to see." I heard the unspoken invitation in his words. "I have a breakfast meeting with donors but should be free by 10, I replied. "The exhibition opens at 10:30, he said, a genuine smile warming his expression. "Perfect timing." As we parted ways, each entering separate vehicles, I felt a curious lightness. Not the breathless anticipation of new romance or the comfortable familiarity of established partnership, but something different. The freshness of possibility unfolding between two people committed to authentic connection. The following morning, after concluding my donor meeting, I found Daniel waiting in the hotel lobby. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a navy sweater rather than the tailored suits that had been his Cooper uniform. His camera hung around his neck, a visible symbol of his reclaimed passion. "Ready for some art?" he asked, his tone relaxed but with an undercurrent of anticipation. "Lead the way," I replied, falling into step beside him as we exited onto Michigan Avenue. The spring morning was bright and clear, the city alive with movement and possibility. As we walked toward the Art Institute, we talked about everything and nothing: the symposium's success, his photography projects, my ideas for the Foundation's next initiatives. What struck me most was the absence of performance in our interaction. Neither of us was playing a role or fulfilling expectations. We were simply two people enjoying a morning together, our shared history informing but not constraining our present connection. At the museum, the photography exhibition featured architectural studies from around the world. Daniel moved through the gallery with evident enthusiasm, sometimes explaining technical aspects of particularly striking images, other times simply absorbing the work in appreciative silence. Watching him engage with the art, I saw no trace of the programmed Cooper heir who had accompanied me to countless gallery openings during our marriage, attending because it was expected, commenting appropriately but without genuine interest. This Daniel was fully present, authentically engaged, his responses unfiltered by external conditioning. "What do you think of this one?" he asked, gesturing toward a black and white image of a modernist building captured at an unusual angle, morning light creating dramatic shadows across its facade. I studied the photograph, allowing myself to respond without calculation. "It's compelling. The light makes the building seem almost alive, breathing in the morning air." He nodded, pleased. "That's exactly what I thought." The photographer managed to capture something organic in the concrete and glass. As we continued through the exhibition, our conversation flowed naturally between art, architecture, and gradually, more personal topics. He shared recent experiences from his recovery process. I talked about challenges in balancing the foundation's growth with maintaining its mission integrity. When the exhibition ended, we found ourselves in the museum's garden restaurant, sharing lunch beneath a glass ceiling that flooded the space with natural light. "I've been thinking about authenticity," Daniel said as our meal concluded. "How do we know when we're being truly authentic versus performing another kind of role?" The philosophical question reflected his ongoing recovery journey, the continuous work of distinguishing between programmed responses and genuine preferences after years of systematic manipulation. "I'm not sure perfect authenticity is achievable, or even definable," I replied thoughtfully. "We're all shaped by our experiences, relationships, and social contexts. But perhaps authenticity isn't about being free from influence so much as consciously choosing which influences we embrace." He considered this, turning his water glass slowly between his fingers. "Conscious choice. That makes sense. It's not that I can erase Harriet's conditioning completely, those neural pathways exist, but I can recognize them and deliberately choose different responses." "Exactly," I agreed. "And that choice itself is an expression of autonomy, even if the options we're choosing between are partially shaped by our history." As our conversation deepened, I recognized that this exchange, thoughtful, mutual, without hidden agendas, represented exactly the kind of authentic connection we both valued, not because it was romantic or dramatic, but because it was genuine. When it came time for Daniel to leave for his flight, we stood outside the museum, the city buzzing around us. "Thank you for this morning," he said simply. "It felt real." I finished for him. He nodded, a smile reaching his eyes. "Exactly. Real." As we said goodbye, there was no dramatic declaration or definitive conclusion. Just the quiet acknowledgement of authentic connection and the possibility of more such moments in the future. Watching his taxi pull away, I felt surprisingly content with the uncertainty. Whatever evolved between us, friendship, partnership, or something else entirely, would develop organically from mutual choice rather than external expectation or manipulation. Walking back toward my hotel beneath a canopy of new spring leaves, I realized that this was perhaps the truest freedom. Not the absence of constraint, but the presence of authentic choice. The freedom to discover connections based on genuine affinity rather than strategic calculation or programmed response. In the end, that was what our work was truly about. Not just exposing manipulation or punishing perpetrators, but creating spaces where authentic selfhood could flourish, where genuine connection could grow, where autonomy could be exercised with awareness and intention. It was the work of a lifetime, this cultivation of authentic selfhood. But standing on the sun-dappled Chicago sidewalk, watching new possibilities unfold all around me. I knew with certainty that it was work worth doing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.